Test one, test two. some sort of an effort?
Maybe. Like, we're kind of throwing it out there.
Yeah.
You know, we don't know. So,
Just one little piece if I can.
yeah.
When you don't get together to play,
Well, actually, it's not. My lather is.
breakfast is served, coffee, whatever you
Test one, test two. It's okay. Test one, test two.
there's a scene every year where I'm like, where's the producers? Where's the producers? And then finally the show. Finally a producer. I was sitting next to my friend Kathy Gay at the movie premiere, and she was laughing at me, and the screen was always one.
Thank you. Thank you. Next Monday. So, yeah. No, they're going to make it so, you know, 6 days. It would be great. I know, it's like going into politics.
Early, loyal, newsletter subscriber. Yes. Now the hard work again. No, it's a real give that buzz and launch a news operation in Green County.
Test one, test two, test one. No buzz.
And this is just a reference R1. So yeah, I'm taking it and feeding it into electrical. It sounds pretty good. So you want my splitter back?
The way that I could even get it. I mean, like if I put that splitter there, I thought, why don't you have it?
Let me put the splitter on and see if the buzz goes into my.
Okay, thank you.
Check one, two. Check test.
see you.
So you're gonna end up sitting here. So we'll probably want to
I appreciate you, Sue. Thanks.
Be here, it doesn't matter.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is. Because
Yeah, for
I can
sure.
take it with me if you
I
if
don't
it's
know.
in your space.
Yeah, no, I know. I think that, yeah, yours. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. So I'll troubleshoot.
Oh, there it is.
There it is.
Okay. So this
Just came in.
that guy right
What is making that happen?
Check 1 2, mic check test 1 2, ringing check 1 2, check test 1 2. Check 1 2, mic check test 1 2. Lavalier check 1 2. Doing a mic check 1 2 3 4 5. Check 1 2. Check 1 2, check test 1 2. Check 1 2, mic check test 1 2, mic check test 1 2. Check 1 2, check test 1 2. Check. Okay. One again. Check 1 2. Mic check test 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2, check test. Check 1 2, mic check test 1 2. Check 1 2. Check.
is Corey gonna be set?
So, Paul's gonna open stuff.
Oh, Corey's gonna be
Everyone's
here,
gonna be sitting,
right?
yeah, Corey will be here.
So he'll be sitting up there.
Yes, although if you're able, I just wanna see, make sure that everyone has a place to sit, because you guys are gonna call them here eventually. If you're comfortable standing,
I don't mind.
just for a few minutes, while we do the presentation,
Okay.
all that. But
Okay.
if there's room to sit, please sit.
I got you. I got you.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, this thing hurts. This little thing, like,
Does it?
yeah, it's like, yeah, I'm gonna put it in my pocket. It's like, ouch.
Yeah.
Okay, I am. My wrist. Oh, good. Okay.
started in a minute here, so if you could find a seat, that would be great. Thank you. That was fast. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for being here early on a Monday morning. I'm Paul Teske. I'm the Dean of the School of Public Affairs here at the University of Colorado, Denver, and we're delighted to be hosting this event that we think is incredibly exciting, and we're sure that's why you're here. Just some logistics. As you probably know, the bathrooms are around the corner. There's food that you've been enjoying. I should note the University of Colorado Denver tries to take seriously its anchor institution mission, which is to try to build community wealth and use small and locally owned businesses. So Dave of Scratch Catering provided the breakfast this morning. So we're really delighted. Thank him for that. I'm going to be very brief, but I just want to again say welcome and hello. And you know the title of this, Local News as a Public Good, is I think very interesting and provocative, and in many ways sums up the conversation I think we're going to have. For me, I teach economics to our public affairs students, and a public good has a very precise definition actually in economics compared to a private good. And before the test, I tell them, well, when you get a question on the definition of public goods, don't just say it's public and it's good. It's a little bit different than that, and the technical definition is that a public good is, in pure public good, is non-rival and non-excludable. So what does that mean? A private good is rival in the sense if I'm drinking my Starbucks coffee, you can't drink the Starbucks coffee that I'm drinking at the same time. And it's excludable in the sense that you have to pay for it. And so a pure public good, like national defense, is typically seen as one, is once we have national defense, we have it for everybody, right? You can't sort of single people out and say you don't get it. It protects the whole country, it protects everybody in it. Another example of maybe not quite as pure public good is K-12 education. We think that the education of other children is important, so even though a typical, only 25% of families at any one point in time have a kid, their own kid in K-12 education, they pay property taxes and other taxes for other people's education, right? Because the idea is it's good for everybody, those benefits are shared. I think we're having a conversation in our country right now about whether healthcare is a public good or not, or whether it's still more of a private good. But the idea that local media and media information might be a public good, I think is incredibly interesting, incredibly provocative, because the other piece of public goods are that they're underprovided by the market, right? Private goods, the market, if all things work out right, provides the right amount of that good for people. Public goods, the market won't, and you have to tax people in order to pay for those public goods and get the full public benefits. So I think it's a fascinating conversation. I'm looking forward to the great group that's here, the Colorado Media Project, Gates Family Foundation. So with that, I want to bring up the person who's probably put the most energy into this, and that's Melissa Davis. She's the Vice President for Strategic Communications and Internal Informed Communities, at Gates Family Foundation. She's been on the executive committee of the Colorado Media Project. She's led the public policy working group, and maybe most importantly, her own career has been in journalism, working for local newspapers and public radio at the local level. So please join me in welcoming Melissa Davis.
Thanks for being here. This is such an exciting and important conversation that we're having, and I just thank you all for being here. It is a provocative one, and we knew that going in. We want to thank Paul for hosting us here. He always hosts such wonderful conversations on a wide variety of topics. If you're not on their mailing list already, the School for Public Affairs hosts conversations like this quite regularly. So please sign up with him. Emma as well, thanks for all your help getting ready. I want to recognize that there's a lot of members of the Media Project in the audience, both journalists who participate with us, executive committee members, public policy working group members. So if you guys can just, if you feel like you're a part of the work that we're doing, can you just raise your hand and just be recognized? So, all right. So it really is a broad community effort. So before we get started, I just want to frame things. I'm going to show you a lot of slides and a lot of data and kind of get into the weeds with some policy things. But if you remember 5 things, I just want to start there. First of all, the business of local news is in crisis. Not everyone knows this. In fact, 70% of Americans think that their local news outlets are doing very or somewhat well financially. That's from Pew, a 2019 study. It's not actually the case, especially for newspapers. Broadcast media is doing better, but the advertising model for local news is struggling. But this is not, our conversation today is really not about saving an industry. That's why the Media Project did choose the motto, local news is a public good, because Colorado communities suffer when news deserts expand. We have a lot of research, we're in this, the Media Project is in this, to ensure that all Coloradans have reliable access to high quality local news and civic information from trustworthy, nonpartisan, independent sources. So we really believe that community, city, and state local news is really important to the democratic decisions that we need to make as Coloradans. And we rely on local news to really break down complex issues and bring us concise, independent facts on important topics facing our state, like health, education, the environment, government, so that we as voters can make good decisions. We also rely on local news and local journalists to hold the powerful to account. Government, whether that's government, businesses, individuals, and at their best, local journalists really are working on behalf of the people, helping to maintain a delicate balance of a civil society. But even though this is this kind of civic journalism is struggling, we believe that there is a path forward, and it might be even better. We're not really nostalgic about the good old days of journalism. We're trying to look forward and embrace the future, digital, mobile, online. But the power of local journalism is that local journalists live in our community. They are here among us. They can continue to stimulate important conversations. They can work as conveners, as co-conspirators, and really working with the public to do all these really important jobs. So moving forward, we believe that philanthropy and the public have a critical role to play. The type of journalism we're talking about is expensive. It's not a lot of the more profitable elements that used to be in your local newspaper, the car ads, the classifieds, they've been kind of peeled off to their own profit-making ventures. And what's left is the important jobs that aren't as profitable, but they're still vital to our civil society. So we do believe that philanthropy is already stepping up in that way. Foundations have been for a while, and for the first time this past year, individuals have outnumbered, or I guess they've contributed more to local nonprofit journalism than even foundations. So we believe that there is an interest there. And we'll of course be talking about the public good. And then finally, we really believe that Colorado is positioned to be a national leader in this area. We're a purple state, we're practical, we're known for innovation and independence. It might surprise you that we're just one of just 15 states that doesn't currently support local public media. This isn't, even though people kind of sometimes like to frame this as a very controversial topic, we like to think that it's not really. There are public dollars going to support public media in 35 states in the nation, in many democratic nations. And we see this as an opportunity that we aren't doing that yet in Colorado, because we can kind of frame the conversation in a forward-looking way that can support not only just traditional public media, but also innovative new models that span a range of business models and ownership types. So let's get going. Okay, so let me start by saying this study is just one piece of work that the Colorado Media Project undertook this summer. You can see more on our website at coloradomediaproject.com. The Media Project is meant to be a center of gravity for the public conversation about the future of local news. The work is with journalists, academics, philanthropists, business leaders, students, you name it. We're focused on three things: building capacity and working with local newsrooms on long-term sustainability, increasing collaboration among newsrooms. How do we work together more efficiently as resources are scarce? We can't be in the old kind of competitive frame of mind, and a lot of newsrooms are embracing that. And finally, building community support. How can we expand the circle of people who care about the future of local news? So the Public Policy Working Group this summer fits into the third bucket about community. How do we expand the people who care about this topic? And how do we think about this from a policy framework and bring, we asked ourselves, well, actually, hold on, sorry. First, I want to thank all of the working group members. This is everyone who participated. We met over about four months over the summer, a series of meetings, and I just want to thank all of these folks from a broad range of backgrounds. So if any of you are in the audience, please raise your hands. All right, yay. Okay, so here are the questions that we started with. Should state and local governments play a role in stabilizing and sustaining the future of local news, information, and independent journalism? What public policy levers and funding pathways are available and viable in Colorado? And what would the public support? So we came at this with curiosity and some skepticism among us. Forefront in our minds was, how are other states and nations doing this in a way that protects independence of the press and also free speech and prioritizes the needs of communities? So when Coloradans, especially Denverites, think about the crisis in local news, you might see this in your mind. This photo says 1,000 words. It was published last April, and it just kind of visually sounds the alarm in national news, this Post editorial. But the truth is, it's not just the Post, right? We all know that in this room. It's not just Denver. It's not even just Colorado. The professional journalists on the job covering critical information needs of Colorado communities is down 44% since 2010. Most of this loss is in newspapers, and where this is really felt is local, small towns, suburbs across Colorado. Those of us sitting here in Denver might not feel that there's a crisis in local news because we have more organizations kind of popping up. More coverage of the Capitol, actually, than we've had in the past. But Colorado communities with small local papers who are also seeing reductions in staff are really struggling. Meanwhile, of course, our state's population has exploded. So this is something we show. Probably a lot of people know this, but for those who don't, I'm going to show two charts. This is the news business in 2 charts. This is what's happening in local newspapers, especially. Most of these revenue over the years has been in advertising, and as digital, 20 years ago, local advertising sustained local news outlets and subsidized the creation of civically important content. Revenue from readers or circulation has never accounted for more than 20% of that revenue pie. And so local advertising subsidized the creation of civically important content alongside the classifieds, auto ads, et cetera, which have now all been fragmented into their own tech startups. Digital ad spending is eclipsing all other media. 2017 was actually the first year that digital ad spending finally beat television. So this year, 2019, digital advertising is expected to eclipse all traditional media combined. So even though this crisis right now is in newspapers, I was at the Broadcast Education Association conference on Friday, and they are also starting to see digital chip away at their revenue model as well. And so local TV news, while enjoying some sustainability right now, might be facing an uncertain future as well. So where has all the ad revenue gone? 60% has gone to these 2 companies. It's in the shift of the digital economy. These are just simply better at reaching audiences. Newspapers used to be the only game in town. If you wanted to get eyeballs, everyone was there. As everyone goes online, here's where your eyeballs go. And local news can't compete. Even Amazon has less than 7% market share there with digital ad spending. They're not just competing for ad dollars. Local news is competing for time. Netflix and Hulu and all these other, Instagram are all, when you look at your phones, this is no surprise to anyone, I'm sure. So why is all this important, right? The research shows that local journalism is essential for democracy. That journalism is not just a business. So I'm going to flip up some things here. There's a lot of research in our the extended version of our white paper. We have an executive summary, which is 5 pages. We have a 30-page research paper, which you can look at. There's all sorts of citations, but losing independent local news coverage has been linked to declining civic engagement, political polarization, less informed voters, fewer political candidates, higher government costs, and slower economic growth. So we can ask ourselves, why do we focus on newspapers? Again, kind of sometimes this is the biggest pushback we get is like, why are we focusing on newspapers? Nobody reads print anymore. But in reality, this is a current statistic from Duke University, just came out in 2019. They did an analysis of the remaining newspapers across the country, and they categorized all the content that was being created into content that was critical coverage as defined by the FCC. So those are the 8 categories that are in the paper, including like education, the environment, government, politics, health. If it was coverage of critical information, if it was local, and if it was originally created. And this is the reason that we are focused on newspapers and kind of the decline when we talk about news deserts, because certainly there's all sorts of other types of publications in communities that are around, but newspapers, traditional newspapers, are really still producing the lion's share of the content. But the same report shows that digital native online startups are knocking it out of the park when it comes to covering critical information needs. So, we see a lot of this trend is, a lot of newspaper reporters starting online-only sites. So this is, I would say, a bright spot, that there is still, and that radio and TV are still carrying a lot of weight as well. So 2 points here. This is a chart showing, we did an analysis of 151 newspapers that are currently operating in the state. We took the research that you all might have seen from University of North Carolina, Penny Abernathy, she's on our National Advisory Committee. So thank you to Penny for providing all of her most current data to us for this. We also cross-referenced it with information from the Colorado Press Association to make sure that we kind of had all of the newspapers accounted for that we knew of. We also did a little bit of online research, and thanks to Rich from the Bell Policy for helping with all of this research throughout the paper. What we found was that there are 151 newspapers serving the state right now. Their total print circulation is about 1.2 million, and more than half of Colorado's newspapers are small businesses. They represent 51% of the state's total newspaper circulation. So even though we often hear about consolidation, conglomeration, we're really still talking about a lot of these businesses being owned by local, people in their community, in a business that is struggling and, looking at a future that they are still trying to navigate. So here's why this all matters is that news deserts are a real thing. Between 2004 and 2019, Colorado has lost 33 newspapers, about 1 out of every 5, including the Rocky Mountain News in 2009, which kind of takes the headlines usually. But there have been 32 other papers. At least one county, Baca County, has no local paper. Median family income in Baca is half that of the states as a whole, while its poverty rate is twice as high. I'm just going to acknowledge that this visual here does not match our data yet, so we didn't have time to make a new image. But this is from the UNC report. So while it has 3 counties, we did actually find when we started looking that there were publications in those counties. So Baca is the only one that doesn't. But in addition, 30 Colorado counties have only 1 newspaper. 80% of those newspapers are published weekly. 83% are located in non-metro areas. 40% are in Colorado's most rural counties. So we're really talking about rural residents who are having the most issues with local news deserts. It stands to reason, there's fewer people there, but those individuals still need good, accurate news and information about their state governments and these types of things, and that just is really dwindling as newspapers struggle. And in fact, of Colorado's rural papers that are the last remaining in their county, they're absolutely vital to those people living there. 43% of those reach at least half of their county residents, and about a third reach almost all of their residents. So when you look at circulation numbers, they're really the only source. And if those things go away, all that will be left is really just statewide coverage with state level reporters kind of coming in every so often to cover a story that might be timely. So all of this is a little depressing, right? So I wanted to help, I hope you find this slide a little bit hopeful. Despite all this, Coloradans trust local news. They think journalists are doing a pretty good job. Despite political polarization at the national level and mistrust of media at the national level, which you see often in national polls, local people really trust their local media. If you ask people, do you trust the media? There's a really low percentage. If you say, do you trust my media? It's very high. So we see that is a bright spot. And local news is still viewed as still relevant and still connected to the community. So hopefully these are some good, but we can always do better, right? So anyway, but this is the real issue here. There's a disconnect. Does anyone want to guess? Just shout out, like, what do you think this percentage is?
20%.
28. Now I know who read the paper. No, no, it's close. It's close. 15%. So it's only 15%. This is according to a Pew study. We've done some recent polling that suggests it might be a little bit higher, but that's a pretty low number, right? I mean, if you think about. So again, I want to kind of turn the page into some positive things on the horizon and things that are happening. As I mentioned before, we think that the future of local news is going to, as advertising declines, if you think of the revenue of these businesses as a pie, if revenue from local ads is declining, what's going to fill those gaps? So far, some of these things have been we've been testing out new models, in philanthropy for a while, and some have gotten to the point where they feel somewhat sustainable with a revenue pie that looks more like a philanthropic model, a public media model. So some of the so what this means is philanthropic sector has been stepping up more in a bigger way with foundation funding, but also individual support. If you think about public media, individual donors give most, the lion's share, and it's that broad base of support that allows public media to enjoy independence. If one funder goes away, if government funding is cut back, that loyal membership base is what sustains those outlets. So we see that becoming more and more of the revenue, part of the revenue pie. Local advertising, some philanthropic support from big institutions, a lot from smaller individual members, earned revenue, still doing events. So it's a broad, it's revenue diversification, sorry, to sum it up. These are partners on the Colorado Media Project. These are philanthropic supporters. Just want to start there because we're not just talking about public support without kind of putting at least some of our money where our mouth is. And then also, we think the future has a lot to do with collaboration. We've talked before about the decline in the number of journalists that are on the beat. Those that remain are really have a new spirit of collaboration and kind of banding together, realizing that they're the importance of the role that they play in the state now doesn't leave a lot of room for the traditional way of thinking of competition. If we think about the major things that need to be covered, there's just fewer folks to do that, and so this is a great example. The Colorado Sun, if any of you saw it in, I think, was it 10 different newsrooms, including yours?
About 15.
About 15, wow, okay. That's even more than I thought. So anyway, the Colorado Sun helped bring this project together to look at mobile homes, the kind of last remaining bastion of affordable housing in a lot of communities, brought newspapers and whatnot from across the state. They're doing also some interesting things on the business side. In just 1 year, 40% of their revenue is now coming from individual donors. I think that's pretty impressive. And so those are the types of revenue diversification that we hope to see with more media outlets in the state. Again, mission-driven public media is stepping up and playing a much bigger role. Colorado Public Media is another bright spot. It's set to be the largest newsroom in Colorado by the end of 2020. They're aiming to have 70 reporters with a big presence at the Capitol, but also across the state, and partnering with community radio, and KUNC is also doing a lot of strong partnership with community radio stations across the state. Another bright spot on the media horizon here is Rocky Mountain Public Media. They are building a new building in downtown Denver, a $34 million building opening in the spring of 2020. On the first floor, they're going to have a community media center with public access, a black box theater, video and audio technology to help citizens learn how to tell their own stories and whatnot. And on the third floor, opening in 2020, I'm excited to, I don't know if this is an announcement, but we've been talking about it for a while. So this CoLab is going to be a shared newsroom in downtown Denver that'll involve all of these partners. So the thing that's really exciting about this is that this is really in line with the ethos, I'd say, of the Colorado Media Project, in that it includes newsrooms in newspapers, TV, radio, print, online only, and this is about public media, nonprofit, and commercial entities, all kind of joining forces to think about how they can collectively really effectively serve the state of Colorado. So I hope you guys kind of keep an eye on this, because this is a pretty exciting development. So if we've got some promising things going on here in local news, some recent events and precedents in terms of, I'm going to shift to the public policy stuff here. The Public Policy Working Group, we brought together, looked at a few different models in particular. We looked at a lot of things, but here were some of the big ones. In July 2018, New Jersey passed a bipartisan civic information bill, and we have some of our friends from Free Press. Mike Rispoli is going to be up here on the panel in a minute. They had a bipartisan effort to create this civic information consortium. They allocated $2 million of state-level funding to seed innovation and transformation of local news. We'll go into that a little bit more in a second. In 2019, Canada passed almost $600 million 5-year package of tax incentives to support journalism, and those incentives were really open to journalistic entities of all types. They're one of many nations that support public interest journalism at the federal level, including us, through public media. Something near and dear to my heart, I'm a Longmont resident, and I got involved on a personal level in this conversation here in Longmont, which has a newspaper that moved, in Longmont there is a conversation going on about the role that public libraries might play in the future of local news as a trusted institution. What role might libraries play? And also recently, there's U.S. Congress, has a bipartisan group in the U.S. Congress, including Ed Perlmutter and Diana DeGette, introduced legislation called Saving Local News Act of 2019, aimed at making it easier for media outlets to gain nonprofit status and to collectively push back against Facebook and Google for a larger share of digital ad revenues. So now we get into the 5 recommendations, and we're going to explore these and spend most of our time talking about just those, but I did want to just frame so that we kind of had a little bit of background and everyone's up to speed on the the Colorado news landscape. Our first recommendation, we believe that we should empower local communities and voters to raise local revenues to meet their information needs. We're a very independent state, we're a purple state. We really wanted to put this one first and foremost, that it should be up to local communities to raise local taxes for this, because they know what their communities need. And they can, but we also feel like there should be a state level framework to do some things to establish a framework that protects free speech, ensures inclusivity and maximizes community participation, and prevents direct and indirect influence from governmental bodies, departments, or officials, as well as private individuals. So I think this kind of bubbled. One of the things driving the conversation in Longmont really was this idea of a special district, special information district. And we thought that there's some precedence here for doing something like this. The Scientific and Cultural Facilities District that was passed in the Denver metro area to support arts organizations is a good model. It's been working since the late 80s. Also, the Early Child Care Development Special District was just passed in 2019. And what that did was it provided a state level framework for local communities to raise local taxes if they needed early childhood education to tax themselves, to kind of come together, form special districts and tax themselves to create that opportunity in their local areas. So the caveat in this, and all of the policy working group members wanted to put this one first because we do think local communities need to have the strongest voice in setting the agenda for what needs to be covered in their local area. But this does rely on the political will and capacity, and it's more likely to, we thought it was probably more likely to take hold in more affluent areas that are willing to tax themselves for something like local news. So we also wanted to think about those news deserts, the places that are really under-resourced, that don't have as much resource and it would be less likely. So we struggled to think, how could we spur innovation in those areas? So to address the gaps in underserved areas and also spur innovation across the sector, we also recommend doing something at the state level. So currently Colorado's, like I said previously, just one of 15 states that doesn't provide any state level funding to support independent public media. Of the states that do, average annual revenue is $7.9 million or $1.75 per adult resident. So something like this could be modeled on the New Jersey Civic Information Consortium, which, as I mentioned, passed with a large bipartisan majority in 2018. How that works is they have an appointed, nonpartisan, independent body that awards grants directly to news outlets or to collaborations among outlets and community groups. In Colorado, this is something we kind of dreamed up that maybe OEDIT or DOLA, the Office of Economic Development and International Trade, right? Isn't that what OEDIT is? And Department of Local Affairs might be existing places that a program like this could exist. There are some grant programs in those departments already that are distributed by independent bodies, so that could serve as a model. We would think that the priorities for a public-private, we think that this could be used to leverage private funds as well, and in the same way that the state funds often require matching grants from private philanthropy. And the priorities for such a state-level fund could include encouraging positive civic engagement, holding government officials accountable, expanding the diversity of opinion available to the public, and promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. And those weren't priorities that we just dreamed up either, by the way. They're priorities that were set by the Canadian government. One of the members of our public policy working group, Sue Cross, who's hopefully watching online, she helped consult with them as they were deliberating how to set up and how to distribute those public funds. So, and also, sorry, the Civic Information Consortium also contributed to those priorities. So the Colorado Press Association estimates, our third one, Colorado Press Association estimates that as many as 44 of Colorado's 151 local outlets have owners who are approaching retirement age, and they may be looking to sell their papers and exit the business. A lot of these are in rural and suburban areas that won't have any local coverage if these folks don't find a way to exit the business and just decide that they want to close down their papers. Combined, these newspapers in transition provide nearly 500,000 Coloradans with local news, and many are important sources of independent local news for their communities. Helping small business owners transition, helping small business owners navigate this time of transition in a way that allows them to divest their assets while also ensuring that new owners and business models match their civic purpose could help strengthen local newsrooms, community connection, and reduce the pressure of profitability. Colorado's existing small business and rural assistance programs could be tailored to help local media owners or entrepreneurs gain technical skills or transition to launch new employee-owned media businesses, public benefit corporations, or nonprofit organizations. So there's a range of options for this. We have them all kind of detailed in the paper, but employee-owned, employee ownership, B Corp, nonprofit, these are all models that still allow a diverse range of revenue streams. It doesn't mean that everything has to be philanthropic. You can still have earned revenue, but that you can reduce the pressure of profitability, to reduce the likelihood that that profits might be taken out of the business. So we think that's a promising way to think about how we might help these small business owners transition and think about the future and continuing to serve their communities. Okay, number 4, I'm going to hurry up on these last ones so we can get our panelists up there. So this, we think that we don't know how this is all going to shake out, right? So we really have to prepare for the future. There could be a scenario where all these, where many more local newspapers continue to close, and there is really no local independent source of local news, independent local news. So we also think that increasing support for libraries and higher ed to help meet basic community news and information needs. There's a lot of resources already standing kind of at the ready in these, lots of great media and journalism departments that are doing good work. And we think that with a little bit of vision and funding, they could be really inspired to take on some of these roles in local news, convening civic conversations, making local government data more accessible, providing co-location and physical space, training citizens to cover, to serve as documentarians in the model that is happening really interestingly in Detroit right now. And number 5, state and local government, we think that at the very base level, state and local governments should adopt the policy that the default for data about and generated by the government should be open and not closed. And so this is something that our friends at the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition, this is a proposal that they really helped us with, because this is the fight that they're engaged in, or not the fight, but the thing that they're advocating for strongly at the legislature already. But the idea here is that, we're in a time of democratization of data. And there are lots of things that the state of Colorado is already doing to make that data available to the public, but there is even more that we can do, and we have some pretty detailed ideas, like posting all public data online in machine-readable formats. A lot of times journalists that are trying to do investigative stories, or even members of the public, have to get data in like PDF form and then put it into spreadsheets and like all that kind of stuff. Like, those are things, if we just kind of standardize that everything has to be given in an Excel spreadsheet, that would be a start. Providing training for open meetings and open records for all elected officials in governments. Like, we shouldn't need to spend a lot of time, working with public officials to kind of help them understand the sunshine laws. And then also limiting the total cost for acquiring some of this data and information. Again, this is not just journalists, it's for members of the public that need this government data. That's actually our government information and data, and so the cost that can accrue sometimes should be reasonable and manageable for citizens and media outlets to do. So wrapping up, how would we pay for any of this? So we feel like some of this is genuinely things that could be done with existing reallocation of existing funds. A lot of that government accountability things, those are already funded programs and things that the government is already doing and expected to do. So just tweaking around the edges on some of those. Growth in state revenue, which may or may not be affected in this next election. with one of the statewide ballots initiatives, redirection of existing funds, but our big, probably somewhat controversial, maybe, I don't know, thought about public funding is, again, we can ask Mike Rispoli maybe about this, but Free Press has kind of inspired us to put this out there, along with Paul Romer, who's a Nobel Prize winning economist, who you guys might recognize his name. Both of these esteemed folks and entities have suggested that extending the tax onto digital ads that are targeted at Coloradans would modernize the state's sales tax system by tying it more closely to the growth in digital ad services and digital services. So the state of Colorado already taxes, has a sales tax of 2.9%. A lot of services are not taxed, but we know that there is interest in modernizing the tax system now to kind of help it keep step with the changes that have occurred in the 21st century. And we think that the time is right to think about this. It's being talked about at the federal level, and we really do think that the federal level is the proper place to implement something like this. If the federal legislators do something like this, we hope that they would do it in a way that directs most of the revenue back to the states. If Coloradans are getting targeted with digital ads, we think that's the share that should be captured and delivered back to the state to decide what to do with that tax money. But if the federal government is not, willing to act on this, we think that it's the time to have a state conversation about this. It's the right time, and we think that it would modernize the tax system, and it would also address some of the consequences and the changes that the digital platforms have had on local civic conversation, information, misinformation, and trustworthy local news. We estimate that such an expansion would have generated $70 million in 2019, which would be enough to pay for all of these recommendations and support other initiatives, such as extending broadband connections to rural communities. So this is an idea that would really tie closely to the impacts that local communities are being felt, and so that's why we put it out there. All this is meant to spur conversation, maybe a little controversy, we'll see. We want to get people talking about local news and civic information, and if we do that, I think we've achieved our goal, at least for this phase's public policy paper. So the full report is online. You can put feedback here. This will be a little poll that we'll send out. And then I'm sure you have a lot of questions. I encourage you to write them on note cards. I'm going to sit down, or we'll stand up, and then Alan is also going to help me with this. But if you have questions, please write them on note cards. We're going to call our panelists up in just a minute and get started. Corey Hutchins, we're so excited to have him here. He is going to be our moderator. He's a journalist who covers media and politics. He's written for the Washington Post, the Columbia Journalism Review, The Nation, the Center for Public Integrity, and others. He has an amazing weekly newsletter that always manages to surprise me. It's all about media and things going on around the state. And Corey reports it, celebrates, chides, questions. This summer he kept saying, someone should really look into this issue of public funding. People keep talking about it. It's becoming a conversation in other states and other places and in Longmont. And so here we are. So he now teaches in the New Journalism Institute at Colorado College. We're so excited that he has brought 15 of his students with him. Can you guys raise your hand? We're so excited to have these guys. Made my day when I heard that they were coming, because these are all the future of journalism right here among us. And Corey has worked with them to read the paper, and some of his questions will be from them. So we're so excited to have you. And Corey, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for that introduction, Melissa. I'm honored to be here to help facilitate a discussion on this really important topic. Thanks also to CU Denver School of Public Affairs for hosting this. For the past 5 years, I've been researching and studying the local news ecosystem and landscape here in Colorado and writing about it for Columbia Journalism Review, which is a magazine based out of New York City that covers the journalism industry, and also for the Colorado Independent, which is a nonprofit news outlet based out of Denver that's staffed and led by 2 women, one who worked at the now folded Rocky Mountain News, and another who left the Denver Post. And I also teach at the newly created Journalism Institute at Colorado College, where we have a heavy focus on local news, and where every day students inspire me to think differently about media. I think we often hear that Colorado is kind of a microcosm of America in a lot of ways. Our former governor, who's now running for U.S. Senate and ran for president actually, he once said that Colorado is like a test tube and people keep shaking it. He was talking about our politics, and I think because our state is almost evenly split between independents, Republicans, and Democrats. But I think Colorado is also America in miniature when it comes to our media scene. Plenty of the ills that afflict our national media, I think, are exacerbated here in Colorado. We have our hedge fund owners, we have our mega mergers, we have our billionaire owners who get involved in politics. We have our news deserts. As this report found, 1 in 5 newspapers have closed in the last 15 years here in that state. I wanted to say that again, 1 in 5 closed in the past 15 years. We do hear a lot about the Rocky Mountain News, but there are smaller ones across the state that have closed as well. While that's the case, there's also, I think, some of the most interesting innovations and potential solutions to how to fix our kind of local news apocalypse are taking place here in Colorado. We have our nonprofit news sector. We have recent startup success stories. You know, we are not one of these states that really have a problem staffing the press corps at the Capitol. I think upcoming legislative session is going to have more desks filled in the press corps at the state capitol than it has in a lot of years before, and more probably than other states. Public radio and public television here are on the march across our state and are expanding, and the Colorado Media Project, of course, is researching ways to make our media ecosystem more sustainable. So thanks for them for doing that. And now this, a bold and I think somewhat controversial discussion about public sector support. Yes, that's taxpayer support, right, for the local news. It's a discussion I don't know if we would have had 20 years ago, but we're having it now. And I want to disclose at the outset that I am not personally for or against any of the proposals that we're going to talk about here this morning, but I am pro-debate. I think it is a positive thing. We are having this discussion. I'm proud and excited that once again Colorado was kind of ground zero in an innovative public policy discussion, and this time it's one that involves an industry that's really close to my heart, and I think if you're here and watching this at home, it's probably close to yours as well. So with that, I want to introduce our panel today, and if you can kind of come up as I call your name. We'll start with Greg Moore. Probably a lot of you here all know him. Spent 14 years as the editor of the Denver Post, Colorado's largest newspaper, where he won 4 consecutive Pulitzer Prizes. Prior to that, he was managing editor at the Boston Globe. He served on the Pulitzer Prize board. He's taught journalism, and he's now editor-in-chief at the online marketing firm Deep Digital. He actually wrote a piece for Pulitzer.org about kind of sparking a public discussion about public sector support for the local news. Nancy Watzman. She's the director of the Colorado Media Project, so give her a hand, please. She's an award-winning investigative journalist. She works at the intersection of technology and journalism. She was the editor also for the Knight Commission on Trust in Media and Democracy, which spent the past year exploring how to improve trust in democracy. Mike Rispoli. He is a former journalist from New Jersey. He's now the News Voices Director at the National Free Press organization. His job is to connect local communities to the newsrooms that serve them via public engagement advocacy campaigns and collaborative projects. J.B. Holston is here, and he's the Dean of University of Denver's Daniel Felix Ritchie School of Engineering and Computer Science. He's a media and tech entrepreneur, and he once said in an interview, every time there's been another evolution of something that's the intersection something at the intersection of tech and media. He's kind of been there, so no surprise that he's here again. He helped kickstart the Colorado Media Project. We have Steve Zansberg, a First Amendment attorney here in Colorado, who represents news outlets of all stripes, represents the Colorado, he keeps, make sure that we all are able to do our jobs here in Colorado and aren't getting sued and all that good stuff. He successfully briefed and argued appeals to the Colorado Supreme Court and the United States Court of Appeals in the 9th and 10th Circuit. So everybody give these folks a round of applause for being here and being willing to kind of stick their necks out on this topic. We kind of keep hearing a theme as this rolled out that it's perhaps a controversial discussion. So I kind of want to start right there. And maybe Greg, you could speak to this. Just on Sunday, you have a column with John Temple, the former editor of the Rocky Mountain News.
That in itself is controversial.
Right. So these are former competitors, as you said, right in the lead, former foes who are now working together. So maybe kind of set the stage for us here. Why now? What brought you here up on this stage to talk about this idea?
Can everybody hear me? Okay. As Melissa said, I think we're at a crisis point when it comes to local journalism. And we're not just talking about newspapers, we're talking about all forms of journalism. And I think when you're in a crisis, you have two obligations. One is to sound the alarm, and I think that not enough people still realize just at what a critical juncture that we're at. And then I think second is to push the boundaries, to consider any and everything, even reconsider things that had, been once thought to be unimaginable. As John and I said in our op-ed, this is the time for creativity and experimentation. And I think that means looking at everything with fresh eyes, with a new approach to solving whatever problems may exist, any hurdles that may take to get over. And then I think it also means including looking at tax support for public journalism. And I know it may be surprising and shocking. I know when I started out in the business when I was 5 years old, about 40 years ago, I never thought that I would ever say that. I never thought that I would, ever get to that point. But I think anybody that sort of says, oh, that is ridiculous, I think that's a Pollyannish view. I mean, journalism has been supported by the corporations that we covered, advertisers, and we managed those conflicts, we managed those problems so that we could remain independent, seek the truth, and by and large, we did it successfully. So allowing taxpayers to have a seat at the table when it comes to supporting and pushing and benefiting from public journalism just seems right to me. I don't think that there's anything that's mutually exclusive about it, and I'm happy to be a part of the proponents who are pushing for a re-examination of that, if that answers your question.
Sure, it does. And I just wanted to say also that while, I do plan to ask some questions here, we do hope that you all folks in the audience can write down some questions on note cards and hand them to Melissa or Alan, and she'll come up and hand them to me so I can ask some questions. I want to tell the panelists to feel free to jump in also at any time. If you want to add to something, you don't have to just wait for me to ask a question, all right? I don't know who can ask this one, but we heard in the report, and I think Melissa said something, that there are already 35 states in the United States that offer some sort of taxpayer public sector support for local journalism. Can we get a brief rundown of what those are, and try and get a sense here of what other states have done and identify which proposal here in Colorado would be completely different and kind of be the most groundbreaking, if so?
Yeah. So, first, it's great to be here. Thanks for having us. I think, like you mentioned, there's 35 states that already fund public media. So to me, this actually isn't that controversial of an idea. And I think really we need to view this more of like a reimagining of how public funds can be used. And so a lot of those states give money to NPR and PBS affiliates, for instance. or they give money to some form of community media. Really, like what this paper outlines and what Free Press worked on in New Jersey is thinking about how can public funding be used in a different way to meet the current challenges, in a way that centers communities in that process. So it really, this idea of whether it's a public fund or an information district or other things like that, I think what is really at the core of that is an understanding that communities have different needs, and that we need to create policies that recognize the fact that a solution in one place is going to look different than a solution in another place, which is why some sort of public trust is interesting that can provide grants to meet needs, or this idea of an information district where local residents can make determinations about how their taxpayer money can be used to best meet their needs, and whatever their gaps in that community might be. And again, there is, I think what, to me, this is really about is if public media has always tried to fill in the gaps that the market, that the commercial media couldn't provide, the gaps are so much bigger now that we do need to come up with different ways for how public funds could be spent. So I know that while there are some more traditional viewpoints that public funding should not go towards journalism, we have a 50-plus year history in this country of public funds going to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, NPR, and PBS. I don't think anyone would accuse Frontline of pulling their punches in their investigative journalism work. I also think it's important to recognize, too, that in a lot of states, and it may be the case here in Colorado, is that commercial media accepts public funding in the form of local meeting notices that local governments actually give money to newspapers to advertise. And so again, like even commercial media accepts public funding. And it's not necessarily where the money comes from, and more about what protections are in place to ensure editorial independence. That is true in commercial media. That is true in media that's supported through philanthropic support, and it'll be true in any sort of journalism that is supported through public funding. So I think as long as we have those safeguards and firewalls in place, we do need to think about how public funding can be used to fill in those gaps that are so much larger now.
Do we know why Colorado is not there with these 35 other states? Anybody out there?
I don't know that Colorado ever kind of leads the way in public. Again,
All right. Well, let's talk about that part.
It's going to change.
All right. Well, let's talk about that part, Nancy. Maybe you can talk about this. So you in the report here, you talk about the potential for a statewide fund. Talk to us about the importance of that and how you see that coming about.
Well, I want to pick up on a theme, and I think Mike touched on this, that what's so important about this is because it is a big deal for the public to support, whether it's through the tax dollars or in other ways through philanthropy or membership, that part of this is it's about them, right? So they have to drive it. So that's why it makes sense that it happen at the state level, and then even, as Mike mentioned, at the local level where you can set up these information districts. I mean, I always like to pull out, he can't complain because he's no longer with us, my dad, Whitey Watsman, who was a reporter for the Cleveland Plain-Dealer for many years. And one of the reasons why we're talking about this, the data is all there, et cetera, but it's about relationships. He was a reporter and then a columnist for the Cleveland Plain-Dealer. His photo was in the paper. You might run into him at the store or at a community meeting like this one. He was a known person. So that's why that nexus of trust with local is so important. People tend to trust local more. And it's because they actually know the people. It's not rocket science. They knew my dad, they know the other, we know the reporters in our community. When we lose them, it's really a tragedy for the community. So putting that power in the hands of local, so at the state level and at the very, very local level is I think where it has to be if it's going to work.
This question might work for JB. You have long been at the intersection of technology and media. Can you speak to the intersection of that at this report, some of the pathways that you've located here where technology would fit in, but also maybe in the context of the rural areas, which got a lot of play. in this report. We talk about these news deserts. They're often in rural areas. How do we, I have heard some criticism of some of the media thinker industrial complex, that it's kind of centered around the Boulder and Denver area with a lot of technology talk. How does that help the rural areas that have issues with broadband and connectivity? And how would anything that we do that you propose here address those issues?
Yep, thanks. So a couple of orthogonal, I just wanted to use that word this morning, a couple of orthogonal points, but I think they help contextualize this a little bit. So if every Colorado adult spent $1.75 a year on media, that would be $5 million a year, or about 50 journalists plus. So when we talk about public support, I mean, I think one of the things that the report says is don't forget to support your local media that already exists in the direct ways that you can do that. So $1.75 on the news today for whichever of those media you care about goes a long way. The other thing I was going to point out is that the state has done this kind of thing before. I was part of a group that put together this program called the Advanced Industry Award Grant Program. How many of you have heard of that? See, I think that's fascinating, right? This is a program that's existed since about 2013, and every year gives away about $20 million in grants to support various entrepreneurial initiatives around the state. So it's not as if the state hasn't found a way to support important public initiatives in areas that arguably are fairly controversial. We've been doing it for a long time. There are a lot of folks that are very uncomfortable with the state getting involved in trying to pick winners and losers in industry. But that program has an independent body that actually does the selection of the entities. With respect to the specific question, I think that whatever happens, it absolutely has to focus on the breadth and depth of the issue. I was talking this morning to someone who was observing that part of the problem is that we don't have this aquifer of capital supporting all these initiatives. There are a lot of really great initiatives out there. There is a complete dearth of capital. Part of the reason there's a news desert is that we don't have the water that is the capital. And I don't think that's going to get solved anytime soon. That's even more acute as you move away from the more central areas, or as you move away from topics that are maybe a little bit more anodyne. Anodyne was another word I wanted to use this morning, so I used 2 words. So you think about Chalkbeat. Chalkbeat has been a tremendous success. They're in education, and to some degree, that's arguably a vertical that's a little bit less controversial than investigative journalism of public figures. The acute need for capital support, capacity building, all the rest goes up as a function of the geographies outside of the main urban areas and as a function of the topical categories that are a bit more tendentious. The third word, I guess, was this morning. So I think, I guess my message would be it's not a ton of capital. The state has actually done this kind of thing in the past. It does have to be very centered on particularly addressing the issues where they're most acute, and that isn't necessarily in the urban areas and isn't necessarily in topical categories that are more obvious. And it is very much about representation and inclusion and involvement of people in this business that look like the people that are getting covered. That is a huge problem, not just here, but everywhere in the country.
All right, I hope we can get to more deeper discussion into the rural areas and how this would also help support ethnic media and underrepresented communities as well. And I want to get to Steve Zansberg here as our First Amendment attorney, who maybe spends a lot of his time telling government to get out of the news business. So you're up here now. Why don't you tell us a little bit about anything that maybe worries you when it comes to safeguards, or maybe allay some fears here about when we're talking about the messaging about this. We hear public sector support, taxpayer support, and critics will immediately come at you and say this is government-run media, this is Pravda. How do you mitigate that in any of these proposals that you've read in here?
Well, first, I do come to this from a predisposition of being very skeptical about the role of the media in being a watchdog, keeping the government honest and keeping tabs on it. I also serve as the president of the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition, a participant in this process, as you heard, responsible for the fifth, largely responsible for the fifth proposal to open up government data and make it less costly to access. So, you know, I sort of can bookend with Greg that I came to this realization and becoming a supporter of this initiative reluctantly. But you know, necessity is the mother of invention, and I think the idea that Greg and John Temple would co-author a piece and the types of new collaborative efforts that are going on within the news media, which I embrace and support, they're necessary. Times have changed, and if we had either the type of public support for through subscriptions or philanthropic or other ways and the advertising revenues, if the existing revenue streams were sufficient to support our local media ecosystem, then I wouldn't even be up here, and none of us would be. But the truth is, as you heard, the status quo is a crisis. And so from a First Amendment perspective, remember the First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of the press, abridging the freedom of the press. So it bars government from interfering with and diminishing the role of the press in covering government and covering whatever it wants, frankly. So it doesn't say anything about government shall not fund the press, and that the people, we are of the people, by the people, for the people, that we the people can fund a public good, which is our local media that we all know we need to intelligently vote and have a self-governing democracy. So the concerns are governmental interference in picking winners and losers and picking viewpoint discrimination. And of course, we don't have that problem when it's private ownership, whether it's Rupert Murdoch or George Soros. I mean, that's not a concern. It's only the government, because the First Amendment is only concerned with the government. So that's appropriate. So any of these models, and that these 5 proposals in the report all require, and Mike can speak to this in greater detail from experience in New Jersey, they require insulation and that church wall state that Greg mentioned. Private advertising should not drive editorial decision making. You know, we have the Kaiser Permanente Foundation is funding nationally reporting on healthcare, and people aren't saying, wait a minute, what's up with that? I mean, some people are saying that, but in any case, that wall between church and state, or between funding and editorial content, exists regardless of who's doing the funding. And it's not impervious, and there haven't been lapses. The LA Times got caught a number of years ago with in a big controversial snafu when that wall broke down. So there have to be very stringent walls of insulation between funding decisions and editorial content. And on the other side, so it's both the other way in which governmental involvement in funding as a pass-through, really, is when then government funding becomes so essential that its withdrawal can actually silence one member of the press. And that's so that, and there could be retaliation. We don't like what, and this happens at universities all the time, where student funding fees are withdrawn because we don't like that the student press is covering our administration. We're just going to reduce that fee, and that's an unconstitutional, and those types of actions have been challenged successfully in the past. But the other insulation is that government funding should never be the sole source of any news organization, and it never really has been. Or it isn't envisioned in this report as being anything more than supplementing, not supplanting, not replacing the other revenue streams, the legs of the stool, subscriptions, advertising, and the rest. So I've come to this reluctantly, but I think if you compare the dangers of governmental interference through funding to the status quo, we do nothing, and the trends you've seen continue, I'm on board. I think it's well worth exploring further.
And if any of these these public policy proposals come to pass, you'd be on retainer to defend or. Yeah. Can we get that on record at least?
Yeah, right.
All right, I want to talk about politics a little bit because that's what it's going to take to get some of this stuff through, right? These are proposals that would either have to go through the legislature or would have to go, in some cases, through the ballot box. So there would be some politicking going on here. I'm curious about what you've thought about who would do the lobbying on that, what kind of public education campaign you would also run to not just lobby the legislature, but also get the members of the public to kind of understand the reasons for all this. It's one thing to put a report online, but we have to make sure people, agree with you about why all this stuff is necessary. There's a question from the audience that I'm reading here that kind of ties into this. It's about the New Jersey initiative. The question is, how was that effort truly bipartisan? How do you get Republicans on board when Republicans, even here in Colorado and at the federal level, are attacking the press quite frequently? Colorado is it's kind of a one-party state right now. Will that be problematic? So can you talk about that a little bit from the New Jersey side, and then have somebody here talk about Colorado?
Sure. So I think what's important, just in terms of like the history and the genesis of the Civic Info Bill, which created the consortium that we talked about, is that the state of New Jersey was set to receive hundreds of millions of dollars from the sale of old public television licenses. And this was flying under the radar. And because Free Press had been working in New Jersey, organizing with communities around the state for a couple of years, we thought that it was important that as we were having these discussions about the future of local news, could we actually create a grassroots campaign to dedicate a portion of those hundreds of millions of dollars and reinvest it back into communities? And so the Civic Info Consortium didn't come out of lawmakers in Trenton at the State House in New Jersey. It didn't come out of academic institutions. It really came out of like grassroots organizing that we've been a part of in the state because residents wanted something to change. And so in that respect, it really started from at the community level. And you go into any community around the state of New Jersey, and there were people from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds, all different political affiliations. And so I think what was important was that just from the level of the residents, is that the loss of local news was hurting people across the state. There were greater impacts on communities of color, rural communities, other marginalized communities. But this was an issue that was really affecting all New Jerseyans, no matter kind of where they lived. And so because we were building this grassroots campaign, we were able to build relationships and eventually create pressure on lawmakers, both from the Democratic side as well as Republicans. New Jersey is an overwhelmingly Democratic state, but it was important for us to get Republicans on board, and I don't want to speak for like what a Republican is like in Colorado, but I would imagine that they're maybe a little bit different than a Republican in New Jersey, and so no other comment beyond that. But it's also I think important to recognize that a New Jersey Republican may not be yelling about fake news necessarily, but even if they were, what was important is that as we were lobbying in the State House and as the thousands of New Jersey residents were taking action, the response overwhelmingly from lawmakers was like, yes, this is a problem. Yes, we need to do something about it. And so when the bill was working its way through, and we were working with lawmakers on both sides, it was important to actually hear from those residents who were impacted, telling lawmakers, and the lawmakers actually responding to those concerns of people. And so when the bill actually made its way through into the Senate, it passed with only one vote against it. Almost the entire Republican caucus in the Senate voted in favor of it. Many Republicans in the Assembly, in the New Jersey legislature, were in favor of the bill as well. And so, it didn't require politicking to convince Republicans or Democrats. What it required was them hearing from their constituents that this was a problem and that they were demanding action, that they were demanding some sort of response from the State House to take action against this really significant problem that was facing the state of New Jersey. So I think, as we talk about this issue around public policy to support local news, yes, it's important for us to frame this in ways that many people can hear it. Yes, it's important to build relationships with people from both sides of the aisle in the State House, but really what we need to do is ensure that communities across the state are the ones speaking up in favor of this, because lawmakers will be responsive to their constituents if they feel like it's something that they're demanding, and I think that's true with lawmakers no matter what party they're in.
And I should add, we're welcoming News Voices and Mike and Madeline, who's here, and Craig to Longmont this Wednesday night to have a community conversation in a community which has been already, considering and thinking creatively about this future of news in its community. And it's so important that community be at the center of whatever comes. And at Colorado Media Project, we have been doing and experimenting with various ways of trying to get community involved and listening. A couple of other things we've done, for example, are these one-on-one listening interviews we've done with an outfit called Harkin, who works with newsrooms on arts and culture coverage, which, what do you want? What could be different? And really talking to people in depth about that. Another thing we've done is Migra Hack Colorado at University of Denver, where we brought together community. That was more of a, let's all get together and put on a show, kids, kind of a thing. But it was a way to get people talking and thinking about what is journalism? How do we tell stories in our community? So I think there's lots of different ways to do that, and we're experimenting with them and seeing kind of what works. I'm really excited to see what happens Wednesday night in Longmont.
Yeah, could I just add one thing too, just not to kind of brush over the thousands of New Jersey residents taking action, but that was actually a really big deal, right? Because the Civic Info Bill campaign in New Jersey wasn't about saving journalism. That wasn't something, this idea of the state bailing out newsrooms, and that was not going to fly with communities. And so as we think about public engagement, we really have to think about how has the loss of local news affected you and your community? And that's the really thing that got people excited. And so when people took action, that looks like attending forums that we held around the state. They called lawmakers, they signed petitions. We had people from all around the state testify before budget committees. People went to the State House and directly lobbied lawmakers. They dropped into their local lawmaker's office. So these were people who were not taking action to necessarily save journalism, but just in recognition that their community needed news and information. And so as we're thinking about how are we building a bipartisan coalition to support these types of policies, we need to be thinking about how are we engaging the public, how are we not centering journalism and journalists in that conversation, but instead centering people, and how are we figuring out ways to get them engaged and involved in supporting these new ideas.
I think I was going to jump in. We have talked to legislators on both sides of the aisle already, and the frames are different, but they're not incompatible. A lot of ours look at it and say, gee, that's an economic development, Colorado innovation, small business development opportunity.
Who says that? Can we get some names?
No. And those on the other side of the aisle sort of resonate with the notion that democracy is at risk. But I think the other issue is, when you've got a one-party state, the other party doesn't mind having journalists to the same degree. So I think there's some of that going on. I think one of the challenges for the conversation in Colorado, though, is how do we scale that conversation? I mean, this kind of a forum is great. How do you have 100 times as many people in real time involved? And I think the New Jersey story is a really good example of how you get that done. But a lot of the challenge for this is how do we go from here? This is just from my point of view. Anyway, the start of that conversation. This is not, now we're putting legislation on the table for this session. This is the beginning of a scaled Colorado-wide collaborative conversation about the issue at pace.
Great. Okay, one thing that I wanted to get to is that one of the most interesting things that popped out to me from this report was that you actually looked at the owners of some of these newspapers across Colorado, and you found, I think, around 44 small newspaper, probably the majority small newspaper owners throughout the state are nearing retirement age. I imagine for a lot of these folks, this was a hobby for them. This was a lifestyle and probably not the most lucrative career option where they were living to run a small newspaper, a print newspaper, right? So knowing that, what can some of the proposals that you put forward do to keep these newspapers local, to make sure that they do not end up getting bought up and gobbled up by some sort of national chain, and just to keep them around in general?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump into that deep pool. It's tough. This isn't a solution for, provision of all capital for all media owners all over Colorado. This can be catalytic and important, but I think one of the suggestions is to look at ways to make it easier for conversions on the part of some of these from their current kind of ownership to whether it's B Corp or ESOP or other. There are models in some parts of the country where you've seen more community-wide direct investment in media, and that could provide an incremental, interesting source of capital if it were easy to tap into that for some of these, quite apart from any kind of centralized funding.
Also, I don't think it's so much a hobby. Some of these individuals are my clients, and they've been my clients for many, many years, and they own really wonderful news organizations throughout the state, providing vital resources to their communities. And it wasn't.
Well, I just meant that they really have to be into it.
Yeah, no, it's not particularly lucrative. You're right, but it's a passion, and some of these are family-owned through generations of ownership, and so it's not that the gatehouses of the world and Gannett's are going to gobble these up, because there is no money in it, no real money in it. And so either they're likely to fold. I mean, as you said, 1 in 5 have folded in the last decade or more. And so unless we establish some means of creating a public trust or some type of incentive to keep these operations running and locally owned and operated, they're just going to go away. I'm not concerned about consolidation and corporate ownership from afar. I'm worrying about this trend continuing, and we're going to have another fifth of our newspapers or more disappear.
Yeah, I would just like to add that, things die. It's just a fact. What I think we really want to be focused on is having a funding mechanism that can support the growth of new things. Like there may be completely new ideas that we can't even imagine right now for the gathering and dissemination of news, but you got to have a mechanism to pay for it. I've often said, the stagecoach disappeared and it was replaced by the locomotive, and locomotive disappeared or almost disappeared, replaced by airplanes. There'll be something else. I don't know what it is, but if we can't pay for it, then it can't really exist. And so I think we want to have an environment that encourages a whole host of different ways of thinking about what media looks like, how it's delivered, what it covers, and we want to be able to support a mix in this ecosystem that allows a whole lot of different ideas and individuals to flourish.
All right, well, it is 9:30. I don't know how that happened so fast. I want to ask for final thoughts from each of you on the panel. Steve, if you would start and just go right now.
Well, at the risk of repeating myself, I just think, as JD said, this is the beginning of a conversation. It really is just the very start, but it's a conversation that I think is well past. I didn't come to this as my first thought, but I don't want to say I was brought to this kicking and dragging, but I'm really glad that Colorado Media Project has embraced this and hope that it goes forward and that serious thought be given and conversations and countervailing views be aired and considered.
I think the only thing I'd add is just kind of to pick up on what Greg said, which is we don't necessarily have to conceive of whatever we're doing next as permanent. It can be interim. It may be that we need a few years of this kind of support for these new revenue models to mature sufficiently that these things are sustainable on their own. They're not right now. And without that, I think the trends are really, really clear. So glad we're having the conversation.
Actually, I'm going to have the last word, so I'm going to point it
Oh.
out.
I don't have as much time to think about it. I think what I would just say is, it's like don't listen to the haters, like in general, but like specifically on this, because you know this was a campaign that took years of building and ideation and consultation and collaboration. Often, like when these things get released, we expect, you know, okay, great, like we're going to introduce a piece of legislation tomorrow on this. And so I would just say, like this takes time, and don't listen to people who say that this is impossible. You know, when we started this campaign, the Civic Info Bill campaign in New Jersey, you know, we were told like this is a great idea, but no one cares about journalism, or the public doesn't care about journalism. Or we would talk to journalists and say like this is never going to happen, and you know, which was great for me because that like motivated me. But I think that it's really important to just to recognize that these are new ideas, that people are going to be skeptical at first. And it's really important that we like bring people along as we're kind of discussing these new ideas, knowing that it's going to take time for those relationships to build and for some of these ideas to take root. I mean, even just earlier this year, my colleague Craig Aaron and I wrote a piece about, you know, governments are now going to start funding local news, and that's a good thing. And I think what we've seen over this past year is not only just in New Jersey, but in Ohio and Massachusetts, now here in Colorado, and other places, other states are beginning to look at this. And so what was once even, you know, what was once a controversial idea is now beginning to take root. And so we just need to make sure that we're bringing people along in the process, recognizing it's going to take some time, and not to listen to the people who are skeptical, because this is how real change happens.
I agree with what he said.
Oh.
And so I yield my time to you, Nancy.
Yeah, I just welcome this debate. As Corey said, that's really what it's about. I'm old-fashioned that way. I like the big discussion of ideas. And I think what JB said earlier about how this is a great gathering, but this is not the end of it, folks. Like, this is just the beginning. It's not about the people in this room. It's about the whole state. Really important. The other thing I just want to throw out there that I can't believe we didn't touch on is we're kind of coming to an election year, right, where there's going to be just a lot happening. Folks may or may not remember in 2016, the Internet Research Agency did send a couple of agents to Colorado to try to turn public discourse, and the Denver Post did a great investigation later showing that local news media picked up some of the tweets from Russian trolls and just ran them as fact, right? You know, we have a lot of learning and thinking and work to do, and it's dire. It's not just about newspapers dying. It's about, you know, getting factual information to people, to my kids who are watching YouTube all the time and PewDiePie. So I want to just do a couple of housekeeping things, just really welcoming everyone here today. There's going to be an email in your inboxes when you leave with a survey. If you help fill that out, that really helps us out in planning events and knowing how we're doing. You can find the full report, the executive summary, up on our website. We shared the links earlier. There's an executive summary here. It has it. We also put the whole thing up on Medium. If you're a Medium maven, you can go there and comment there. We're collecting opinion pieces by various folks on Medium and elsewhere. Greg and John hit it off this Sunday, but we also have a piece from Craig Aaron, who's in the room already up, and he's not with us today, but I think he's watching. Jeff Roberts from Colorado Freedom Information Coalition. We have more coming. If you guys want to contribute, let me know. And a couple of other things that are coming up for Colorado Media Project. We have on November 8th at History Colorado, we're going to have an event around the arts and culture listening that I've mentioned. We'll do a presentation around that. Also on November 17th and 18th, well 18th primarily at University of Denver, for journalists primarily, we're going to welcome First Draft News to Colorado. They're an organization, a nonprofit that trains journalists on detecting viral disinformation and the latest thinking on how to deal with it. And they're kind of superstars. They're going to talk about deep fake videos and things like that. So that's coming up. And just to make sure I'm not forgetting anything, yeah, we have comments, links. You can tweet. We've got a hashtag. We're going to be in Longmont Wednesday night. Just stay tuned and keep, please be part of it.
Get down to Southern Colorado. We need your help. We need your help down there. And I know as a reporter and as a journalist, we need your help. We need you to get out of Denver.
Can you identify yourself?
John Rodriguez with the Pulse.
Welcome. I'm glad to finally meet you in person.
And this is, if you guys think you're in a crisis, let me tell you, when you have your pipeline cut, when you have your students not going to CSU Pueblo, We are in a crisis that is beyond what Denver can even imagine. And we have survived without any help, without any real notice. We get, I'm a loudmouth, and I don't come from this world, so I will be a loudmouth on this. We need your help. San Luis Valley needs your help. Grand Junction needs your help. Please get down to Southern Colorado, San Luis Valley, Grand Junction. They need your support. Now, we can't always afford your support, but we need your support. So
Thank you for
please help
coming, and
us.
thank you for saying that. And I'm really, really glad you're here.
Well, thanks everybody.
All right.
And if anyone has any questions for them after, I'm sure they'll hang around and take those from me. Thanks again.